Hello, I'm Eric from the SMaRteN student media team interviewing Chrissie Browne about Gypsy, Roma, and Travelers in higher education. Commonly abbreviated as GRT, Gypsy, Roma, and Travelers are a group of diverse ethnic groups connected by cultural factors, which may include the importance of family and community or shared history of a nomadic lifestyle. They also are connected through marginalization, sharing disadvantages such as poor health outcomes, below average life expectancy, lower educational attainment, and academic and social discrimination. GRT students experience barriers in pursuing higher education, with only 4% reaching it compared to 43% of their peers. Coming from a traveler background, Chrissie pursued higher education through an access course. She went on to graduate from King's College London with a first-class honors degree in nutrition and dietetics. As a student, she worked as a GRT ambassador for the Widening Participation Department, a member of the Advisory Council for the Education of Romani Travelers, and was involved with the GRT Women's Empowerment Network. She is currently the Education and Partnerships Officer at the Traveller Movement, a charity that campaigns for the rights of GRT people. She is also a Widening Participation Officer at King's College London, leading the pioneering RomBelong program, which she co-created to help students from GRT backgrounds apply to university and support them upon arrival. Today, we'll be discussing the barriers to higher education for GRT students, along with their mental health needs at university. Chrissie, thank you so much for being here. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm good. That all sounds like way too much. So thank you. Yeah, it's great to be here.
Oh, well, it's great to have you, and I've learned so much in preparation for this, and I really hope that we can have a great conversation today. But before we get too into things, I was hoping that maybe we could start out with a lockdown highlight, hobby, or fascination of yours during this crazy time. Is there anything that you picked up?
Um, well, I wish I could say I picked up marathon running. Unfortunately, I didn't. But I have started doing jigsaw puzzles very fervently doing jigsaw puzzles. And like most the ones that you get from the charity shops, those really like kitsch ones that you don't know where they come from and who made them and why there's 13 cats in a basket, but they're just special.
And then you can pick one up and you can return it somewhere else if you need to, or pick up. It's like an endless supply of very strange jigsaw puzzles, right?
Exactly. And you've got to like be quite not covert, but you've got to be quite sneaky about how you do it, because otherwise if you keep taking them back to the same charity shop, you're never going to get new puzzles. So you've got to do like a little circuit around the different charity shops to make sure you get new ones.
So I guess that's where the last few months have brought us, to actively thinking about where we pick up our jigsaw puzzles.
Yeah, like everything you've told me about what I did last year, and I'm like, wow, I did that last year, and this year I've done 13 jigsaw puzzles. Like it's a very different world.
It really is, but hey, I mean, we're rolling with it, right?
Exactly.
So getting into GRT students, just for people who may not be as, I guess, familiar with like people from Gypsy, Roma, and Traveller backgrounds, what would you say are some of the commonalities of the group?
I think it's difficult because so you've got sort of Gypsies, Roma, and Travellers that are three distinct different people, as you said. But I think because without going too much into like the history and the politics of it, it's generally people that what I see is that what we've all got in common is this kind of shared like nomadic past that is mostly in the past, but it still kind of pervades how we operate now. But like the culture, which is very heavily orientated with family, with tradition, with service and community, in a nice way, not in a sort of strange, oh, that community is like this way, but kind of being there for each other, and kind of getting through it together. You know, like with a traveller, you'll always know you can have a cup of tea. You can always go there for a cup of tea. You know, if you're in trouble, there's always going to be someone that can help you, which I'm sure is true for so many different people. But that's what I kind of, when I think of travellers and gypsies and Roma, that's what comes to my mind, is that love and that warmth and that family bonding.
That's a very good common starting place, to have for,
And I think it's like the same, like I said, like I think most people have that. But when people from the outside think about gypsies and travellers and Roma, their immediate thoughts are very different to what my immediate thoughts are being a traveller. So many people are like, when they first think of travellers, they're like, oh, they're the people that rob and steal and live on the roadside. And I just always find it really odd because, like, I know of sort of from a personal experience and sort of from friends and family that actually that is such the opposite of what most travellers are.
Yeah.
And so it's quite an interesting dissonance you get.
Yeah. So going from being like the commonality being family and community orientation, what are some misconceptions that you've seen or experienced either within university or not?
Not huge amounts within university because like I suppose uni students listen to this, like you realise that very quickly when you go to uni that it isn't this like kind of American Brady Bunch style thing. Like you go to uni, you go to your lectures and it's all quite quiet and then you have to like actively make friends. Whereas like, I don't know, did you feel that when you went to uni that?
Oh, yeah, it was not what I expected. I was actually, looking through my camera roll from my last year of high school and then my first year at university, the pictures stop and it's all like screenshots of textbooks or little like mixers or meet and greets. And I was like, oh my God, like I struggled during this period because it was such a transition.
Yeah, definitely. So I think I always imagined going to uni was going to be like I would know everyone in my lectures and that we'd all have all these big serious conversations. I didn't even know anyone's name for the first year. So, so I think I didn't really get much of it in uni apart from the odd comment because I did a healthcare degree. I think one of the lecturers once was like, are gypsies and Roma ethnicities? And everyone was like, ew, no. And I was just sitting there and I was like, and I think it's just the idea that people don't even consider that a traveller can go to uni, that there wasn't, the lecturer and the students didn't even consider that a gypsy could be in that room.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I mean, I'm pretty thick-skinned. I've worked in like restaurants and bars my entire life. Well, entire like adult life, not when I was a 5-year-old. But it was just this like strange thing. I was sort of sitting there and I was like, do I say something? Like I should say something. But then equally, I've already just seen everyone's response to the word gypsy as being like, they're like aliens. Do I really want to say something?
Yeah.
Do I trust the people in this room to say that I'm a gypsy? Like all of these things just kept going through my head. And I was like, God. So I just didn't. And that's probably the coward's way out and not the response I should be giving. But I was like, I just didn't want to have that like awkward, long, complicated conversation with people that just didn't understand.
Yeah. And it's also not your responsibility as a traveler to make them understand.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, this was way before I got involved with RomBelong or Kings or any type of, I mean, I didn't even know that like there were traveller activists. I'm not an activist. I don't consider myself one because I think that activists do lots of amazing work and, they're all like out there on the streets and shouting. And I'm like, can I just sort of stay in the background, please? Can I just do a spreadsheet and you guys do the shouting? I'll do the organising. But yeah, when I had that sort of experience in my first year at uni, I didn't even know that, like, I didn't know anything. I knew I was a traveller. That was it. Like, yeah. I didn't even know who Roma were. Like, I was like,
Well, how did you develop your identity as, I guess we may not use the word activist, but as someone who passionately works to make things better for GRT students? Like, how did that transition happen from being a quiet kid in the first semester to where you are right now, having graduated and still working at King's?
God, that's a question, isn't it?
So sorry to hit you with such a hard one.
So I started being a widening participation ambassador, like a student ambassador. And that was simply because I needed money. And it was the easiest type of work that I could do and get money. Because, like, I don't know if you've done student ambassador work, but it's pretty simple. Like, you show up and you be nice to people. Like, so So I started doing that. And then like, as I started to actually understand what widening participation was, and like they were doing all these great work with like underrepresented groups. And I was like, well, a lot of these barriers are the same barriers that travellers face, perhaps not me completely in particular because of the sort of my upbringing, but a lot of travellers. So I just sort of started talking to them about it. And I was like, you know, is there a way we can see, you know, do you do anything with travellers? And they were like, no, but we want to. And then I did an internship with them and sort of just started kind of talking to a few more people and realizing that maybe we could do something. Like, I didn't think it was going to be this. Absolutely not. But I think it just sort of came from a quite a natural place where I sort of, different parts of my life started clicking together. It didn't feel like I had to be like, oh, this is my traveller part of me. This is my uni part of me. This is like my friendship group part. I was like, I'm going to end up having some sort of breakdown if I keep keeping these things separate, you know? And so I just started talking a lot more about it, and here I am.
Yeah. Wow. That's incredible. And it also points to the power of having so many conversations to, yeah, because being a traveler, it sounds like is part of your identity. And if you try to have a university student identity and a traveler identity that are completely separate, that's not a good recipe for good mental health or anything.
No, definitely not. And I think that when I was younger at school, because I went to uni as a mature student at 26 or 27, so not that mature, but, you know, a little bit on. And when I was at high school, especially, I had some really dark times. And I think, I mean, with the beauty of 2020 vision in hindsight, I'd say it is probably because I was quite, you know, you read in the media all the nasty things about travellers and you grow up with that kind of internalized. And I think that made me quite an angry young person. I'm sure there was other issues, and I'm not a psychologist at all, but my years in primary and high school were not the funnest, and I struggled quite a lot. And so I think that in uni, when I went back into it and those types of feelings started coming up again, I was like, I need to address this. And the way to address this is not be a separate person around these people just because they're so different to me. I mean, on the outside, I know I look like any other white girl. Like, I speak quite posh. I speak posh because I worked in bars and restaurants for years. You can't speak with an accent, you know, but so on the outside, I looked the same as all these people. But then when they talked about their upbringing and who they were, I felt like I was from a different planet. And I was like, I can't go through this again like I did in high school. You know, you either choose to go down two paths. And I was like, let's just go for it. You know?
Yeah.
What is there to lose?
Because you know what the alternative looks like, and it's a pretty dark place that you were in high school, right?
Yeah, really, it's a really dark place as the alternative. And I couldn't do that to myself. I couldn't do that with my partner. It was just a whole ball of anger and resentment. And I really didn't want to resent. It's not it's not a university's fault that I'm around people that aren't like me. Like, you know, and I don't want to breed that resentment and that otherness like I did when I was at high school. So yeah.
And belonging is such an important thing. And when you're surrounded by people that you don't feel like you relate to as much, or if there's something blocking that feeling of being able to relate, that must have been really just terrible.
Yeah, I think it's strange, like, because as soon as you start talking, and I think this is what I realized, is that we're all like, whether you're a traveler or you're black or you're mixed race or you're deaf or you're white and rich, and, you know, all of these people, like, actually, as soon as we start talking to each other, like, on a shallow conversation, we're really not alike. But then as soon as you start getting into the themes of life, actually, we've all got so much more in common. And all of a sudden saying, oh, well, you know, as a traveler, this happens when you're young, and, you know, and this is like quite a funny story about my upbringing. And then everyone's like, oh my God. And it's not the same story, but then you break it down into the themes, and it's like love or kind of responsibilities actually we've all got a lot more in common than we don't have in common, you know?
I absolutely agree. We're like connected through these universal themes that you don't quite get through small talk. And it's almost like these feelings of feeling othered or not belonging can block you from seeing that we're all connected through these similar themes.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. What like a mantra I've had lately is it's hard to hate someone up close.
That's really good. Yeah.
Yeah, because
Yeah, exactly. You know, it's very easy. Like when I talk about sort of media representation, and I always say very quickly in conversations now about being a traveller, just because I don't. I like to sort of see how people react, and you can kind of see in their head they're like, this woman standing in front of me is not what I imagine a traveller to be. This woman standing in front of me is not what the Daily Mail and the Sun told me travellers were. She has not tried to steal my wallet once. She has not fly tipped on the road once. And and like you say, it's difficult to hate someone when you're that close, like when you're up close. Like they're like, oh, okay, now I've got to reassess what I think a gypsy is.
yes.
And that's quite interesting too.
And yeah, and for someone who doesn't come from a GRT background, having to confront their internal biases when it isn't necessary for survival, when it's a choice to do so, it's they have to make that choice.
Yeah.
And it's tough when people don't make that choice and to keep their biases, you know?
Yeah, I think you have to learn to let it go though, I think. And I think we all anyone that, you know, it's not pure for it's not purely gypsy and travellers that have that feeling, but I think we all, it's tiring because like you don't want to be, it shouldn't always be like it down to the person to describe and explain and ask you to reassess your biases. And then if you decide not to, then it becomes a responsibility of that person. So I definitely see why travellers don't, and I see why other people don't want to have those conversations. And a lot of the time I don't, and they kind of get thrust on you sometimes. And you get kind of asked to be the representative of this imaginary community. Like, you know, people go, well, can you just get the travellers to stop with all the mess? And I'm like, well, let me put it in the big WhatsApp group we've all got. Sure. Like, absolutely. Like, can you imagine being like, can you get all the white people to stop all the racism? And they're like, oh, well, it's not me. Yeah. You just sort of like these things that people expect of you. And I think that, you know, other communities or sort of other communities, other people get it all as well all the time. So it's not something that is about travellers, but it's just something that we have to deal with too, you know?
Yeah. And something that I think is a real shame right now is, you know, in my preparation for our conversation, I started looking in, like, I thought the RomBelong program was really cool. And I was like, what kind of other programs are there across the UK? And I did not find many, unfortunately. Which is why I think that it's really cool to have the opportunity to talk to you, because I feel like King's is at this pioneering place for accommodating GRT students. So, like, on that note, for GRT students at King's who are trying to cultivate belonging, you started like the RomBelong program. What kind of work do you do there? And also, how has that work been affected by COVID?
So with the RomBelong program, we mostly work at looking at the barriers before university, because as you know from your research, but people that are listening might not know, sort of gypsies, Roma and Travellers are the least likely to finish high school, and the least likely to go on to sixth form. And then, which means, you know, if you're not finishing those two steps, then universities are different. It might as well be in a different country or a different planet. So we look mostly at our activities for younger people, to kind of address attainment, address say in school, going to sixth form. And the reasons that they don't are completely multifactorial. I mean, it gets sort of put onto culture that, you know, travellers don't appreciate education, so they don't go on to sixth form, or they don't want to stay in school. And it's not that, like, it's a whole kind of myriad of reasons that would be a completely different podcast to do. So we mainly focus on sort of kind of working in schools with young people. We've got this sort of in-school project that we did last year, which had to be halted because of COVID, which was a series of 6 sessions in a year 6 classroom with the Traveller students to do a research project with them about what they were interested in. And it started off very open. Me and my colleague Chelsea, we went to the school and we just basically asked these kids what they liked doing and what they were interested in. And the responses we got were amazing, like things like marine biology, game design, astronaut, and all of these things that lots of people just sort of assume travellers don't want to do, because they're all like madly academic. And most people are like, oh, well, travellers are interested in boxing and forestry. And, that's the myth and the stereotype. And I think what we're trying to show in RomBelong is that, yes, like being a boxer is great, being a florist is great, but they're not the only things that our young people want to do. Like my brother is a nuclear physicist living in Japan. Like if he had to be a boxer, he'd be a terrible boxer. He's really skinny. So it's sort of saying that there's a choice, and it's not about making all travellers academic. It's about saying that our kids have the right to have the same choices and opportunities as every other child. So we do a lot of that kind of work, sort of addressing those myths out on the outside, and then with the actual young people themselves, giving them the skills that they need to succeed in education. Just because travellers also have like a less likelihood of their parents sort of finishing sort of further education or even high school. My dad himself, he left school when he was sort of 11 or 12. So, he wouldn't have been able to help me with homework and stuff. And so kind of giving them those skills that other students take for granted, I'd say. And then COVID sort of put a stop to a lot of our work. But it didn't put a stop to it. We changed. So we saw a gap. So when schools locked down in April, everything went straight to homeschooling. And a lot was put onto parents, like straight away, being like, you've got to do all this stuff with your kids. And if you've got a parent that has not finished high school, then actually a lot of that homework is going to be completely out of their sort of sphere of ability. So we started offering tutoring, online tutoring it started with volunteers because we didn't have any funding or budget. And we soon became like oversubscribed. And then we got funding to do it kind of as a permanent fixture from September. So it's now been running since then, and we've got 120 students getting tutoring from our original 15.
Oh my God.
Which is why I'm looking quite tired at the moment.
You must be exhausted.
Yeah, it's great. It's great to see that like parents really want it, kids really want it, and it like blows that stereotype out of the water. So this idea that travellers don't want education, I'm like, well, why have I got a waiting list that's 45 people long whilst I've got what? So it's been really, really, really great and really interesting, and it's an opportunity that wouldn't have come up without COVID. We just wouldn't have even thought of it.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, and I've got to imagine that the like remote aspect of the tutoring could be helpful and something that might be able to continue in some form after COVID, right?
Oh, 100%. What my sort of dream for it is to be, and it was starting when the schools reopened, it was actually starting to work really well in that way, is that it's not a replacement for school. We want our kids to be in school, but it's an hour kind of like on a, after school one night or on a weekend one day, to help them like understand everything at school, understand homework, help with homework, and give them that boost on top of school. And once COVID is over, whenever that's going to be, we really want this to continue, because if we can look at those attainment gaps and keep kids interested in school, the more we keep them interested in school, the more likely they are to go to uni. So I know it's the long game, like mad long game, but if we only focus on 16, 17-year-olds, there's so few that are left that, it just wouldn't be helpful. Like it's not where the help's needed.
Yeah, because if it starts as early as when they're in primary school or even earlier, then so many students you'll have lost by the time they get to secondary, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I think that's the problem with a lot of outreach work. And this is where King's in general is moving away from, not moving away, still obviously giving all those support to those 16, 17, sixth form students. But like so many outreach works are like, oh, we want to work with 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds. I'm like, we know, and not just with travellers, but with all sort of minority groups and underrepresented groups, that the issues start way before they're 16. So then even if they are still in education, they're not going to be going to Russell Group universities or Oxford and Cambridge because they're not going to get the grades, because you need to make sure that they're getting the grades in year 9 to make their choices in year 9. And you know, when you like, it just keeps going further and further back.
Yeah.
And it's quite bold to work with kids that are so young, because it isn't like I can't give Kings an exact time when these if these kids will ever go to university or Kings, like, you know. So yeah, if we were recruiting university, I'm not sure if we'd be able to do it.
Yeah. It sounds kind of like the difference between long-term gratification and short-term, like
Yeah,
16, 17, like it's great. And any like GRT students that are in education at that point and are thriving, like having some, or not even thriving necessarily, but that are still like within the education system and potentially pursuing a like university, like that's great that that is available. But really, like, what about that 16 or 17-year-old that's no longer even in school?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It shouldn't, like, all this sort of stuff that is helping the younger people shouldn't have to come from a university, but because it should be a government, it should be a policy standpoint. There should be more money, there should be more investment into young people, but there isn't. But what I hope and what I'm seeing from lots of universities sort of kind of getting in touch, and doing their own thing, like they might not be at the kind of like the big grandness that RomBelong looks like on the outside. It's not as grand as that on the inside, because it's just me trying to help as many people as I can, or just Kings helping as many people. You know, it's still a small project, really. But hopefully that will create more noise. And as we know, with like Black Lives Matter, with anything, that the more noise you make, the more likelihood things are going to change. But it is tiring, and I see why people stop making the noise, because it kind of gets put onto the shoulders of like one or two individuals. And you've seen the statistics, you've seen this sort of the stark reality of it. That's tiring to the nth degree. Like, it's so tiring that people burn out. And I've seen so many activists that start so excited about it, and then change is so slow, like snail pace, that they burn out, and then it affects their mental health and their physical health and their ability to do the work, which is probably why I try not to call myself an activist, because it's to be an activist, you're just asking for a whole load of extra drama.
Yeah. And like, again, like, any of the work that you do, or not again, but any of the work that you do isn't going to be like as good as it could be if you aren't in a position where you can do the work. And if all of the work falls on one or two sets of shoulders, that's a recipe for disaster, right?
100%, yeah. And I think you see it sort of time and time again, that, like initiatives that are going really well, and then one person leaves and it all falls apart, which isn't sustainable. And it's something that I try my hardest to make sure that RomBelong isn't all about, like, it isn't my program, it's WP's program, that I have been here for a while doing it. But I hope, if anything happened and I wasn't able to do it tomorrow, that it's sustainable to carry on by someone.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how true that is, but I hope it is.
I really hope it is too, because I think that King's, like, from any internet research that I've done, is really at the forefront. It's a really pioneering effort to accommodate GRT students. And on that note, I was kind of wondering, like, in an ideal world where there are resources, what kind of experience would you like, or would you envision, what kind of resources, support would be available to GRT students upon their arrival at universities?
So I'd say some like bursaries easily. I know that people say it's not about the money, but bursaries would go a long way to making people feel welcome, and also make it more possible. And it's not just about them, like their parents. If the parents know that there's a bursary for their child when they go to uni that is specifically for Gypsy, Roma and Travellers, then like it speaks louder than kind of lip service or events that the uni might put on. Like, you know, great. I mean, I know I don't speak for, I would never speak for Travellers as general, I can only speak for myself, but that would mean more to me than a poster during Gypsy, Roma and Traveller History Month, you know, like what is going to make most difference in your life. And I think just like it's that fine line between not othering, like if you're a traveller and you've got to university, then you've still got all the same grades as everyone else. Like it's not as though it's not as like we've got two heads, you know, like the help that we need is the same help that all students need, but some students have got the kickstart that their parents have gone to uni, their siblings have gone to uni, so they know how the system works. So, and I think that's the same for any person that's sort of like the first generation to go to uni, or like, you know, even if you think about sort of forced migrants and people that are going to uni in that way, we just don't know the kind of the ins and outs of this very kind of still middle class, high upper class system that's kind of moving slowly into the 21st century, but it's still kind of a bit archaic. So I don't think there needs to be like specific help for Gypsy, Roma and Travellers, but just more kind of support and kind of like signpost to the things that are already there. Like, I don't think we should reinvent the wheel, but be like, oh, did you know that student services does this? Did you know that we've got these money support things? Did you know that you should be talking to your personal tutor every, I never talk to my personal tutor, so I've got no idea. Like, you know, like these types of things that just kind of maybe just need to be a bit more explicit. That aren't like, I don't think we need sort of separate groups for travellers, or, you know, just a bit more honesty and openness in this sort of very closed off system.
Yeah. So you're saying that a lot of the resources that are needed are already available, but there's a disconnect between those resources and those resources being reached by GRT, or really any first generation university student who does not know how to navigate those resources or anything that's going around them, really, because it's an entirely new experience.
Yes, exactly that.
Oh, wow. And yeah, I suppose that, like, you know, things like groups like RomBelong could do some service in connecting the students that might be interested with those resources.
Yes, exactly. So I think there needs to be more work, and this is something, an area that King's is looking into at the moment. I'm not sure how much I'm allowed to say about that. I don't know. This is where I'm like giving away industry secrets. I'm sure there's nothing secret about it. But that's sort of like, you know, that sort of transition between sixth form and uni. You know, sort of like building that first year into something that's much more supportive for everyone, really. And I think it's sort of a two-pronged thing, because at the moment we need students to tell us that they're struggling. But if you're struggling, or you don't even realize you're struggling because you don't realize that that's not the normal, because you've never been to uni, none of your family have been to uni, so you think, oh god, this is it, you know, this is my depressing, lonely life for 3 years, you know. So there needs to be more of a support system in place, that people don't have to say, oh, I'm going through this. It needs to be preemptive of that, which I don't know how to do at the moment. But I think that even like with programs like RomBelong, just them being there means that student goes, oh, this uni is doing something, so let's have can I email them and be like, hi, I need some help? They shouldn't have to do that, but the fact it's there means that they can.
Yes. And like everyone who goes to university has a tough transition. or if you don't, like, I'd like to meet that person and hear about their experience.
I think that'd be classed as a psychopath. Like, it must be.
Right? Yeah. Like, who raised you?
Yeah.
But yeah, I like, everyone has a difficult transition, but on top of that difficult transition, having these feelings like you may not belong, not knowing how to navigate this system, and feeling so lost, I can imagine that having just like a specific like number to call, person to email, something in place already, like I feel like that could do a lot of service in preventing that feeling of being othered, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that unis are kind of scared to say that students have a crap first semester. Like, unis are, they can put in all of the well-being months they want. Like, at the end of the day, we as sort of institutions need to look at why students feel like that, and why students are more likely to feel like that if they're from an underrepresented background, so, and I think universities are, I know King's definitely is, but it's just sort of like, I think students need to be more honest with each other and say, mate, I've got no idea what I'm doing. Like, do you? But then you don't want to, especially like the 18-year-olds, like, you're coming in and you're going to be like, right, I've got to be all of this,
Yeah.
And I think that we need to foster a more open approach to belonging. And I think that needs to go beyond. I think it needs to go beyond just being able to just saying, oh, if you need help, it's there. Like, that's like the very minimum. And then like, it's sort of like, that's the cheats way out of being like, well, we provide the help if they can jump through every hoop to get it. But you know what it's like, if you're feeling low, the last thing you want to do is have a meeting with your personal tutor to say why you're feeling low. That's going to make you feel pretty othered. Like,
Yeah. So yeah, if there's a pattern of first generation university students and GTR students having an incredibly difficult transition and feeling othered by that transition, like, it would make sense that the universities could be accountable and could take more accountability in that and say, see this pattern, let's put systems in place to anticipate the needs of these students that we're accepting, because there's unfortunately not enough research on like really first generation students or GRT students, but there is enough to say, and enough anecdotal experience to say, like, the feeling of being othered is there, and it's a feeling that can and should be anticipated by universities.
Yeah.
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 I think that, SMaRteN's all about trying to understand that gap between, the resources that are available, and we know that there's been so much work done to accommodate student mental health, and there's a disconnect between the work that's been done, and student mental health is at an all-time low right now. Like,
yeah.
So I feel like really addressing this is really, really on the mark for SMaRteN in general and the research that they're trying to do. And this has been a really valuable conversation to me. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. It's nice to just sort of say it out loud, because I think that especially now with homeworking and everyone being stuck, kind of not stuck, we're being a lot less social, and all those sort of conversations you normally have on a day-to-day basis aren't happening. So your little brain synapses are maybe going, is what I think weird, or is it normal, or am I just making up this whole scenario in my head? So it's nice to remember that I'm not.
Yeah, no, like, you're not. Like, this is what's happening, and these conversations really help me understand and help you affirm what you're doing. So win-win,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly.
I guess one little final question. Is that all right?
Yeah, go for it.
So I'm planning on linking that 2017 report in, and really that's where I would start. But where else, for people wanting to learn more about GRT students in higher education, where would you direct them to learn more and educate themselves?
I would probably ask them to follow Chelsea McDonough on Twitter. She is, apart from being a very close personal friend that I met at King's through RomBelong, and if you know, if everything else completely fails, I'm so grateful for this program that I've now met one of my best friends through it, you know. And so she's an Irish traveller, and she is like kicking it out of the ballpark at the moment. She just got like 90% on her masters, and she was like, "Oh, this is okay." And I was like,
Congratulations, Chelsea.
Me scraping her first, and she was just like, "Oh, no, it's cool." Yeah. So, but she's amazing on Twitter. She does a lot. She speaks. I mean, her degree's also in like the arts. So whereas I can't talk because I'm like, where's the data? Like, what's the statistic on this? 37.5%, please. You know, and she's just like this beautiful, like poetic writing, and I'm like, this is bad. So she's a much better person to follow on Twitter than me. And she links to a lot of different research and writings and things. So definitely her. Oh, it's really embarrassing. I can't think of anything else really. Like there's a couple of reports that have come out the last couple of years. But I can't remember them off the top of my head. I think they were all in the email that I sent to you. So I'd probably sort of say people just have a little bit of a Google, really.
Yeah, and maybe I'll post those resources when this interview is posted, so people can, and also link the Twitter, because I feel like that's probably the most likely to get clicks.
Definitely.